Welcome to the History of European Theatre podcast, and thanks for joining me on this journey through millennia of theatrical history. Episode 140, The Kings Lynn Medieval Stage, a conversation with Tim Fitzhigham. In October 2023, the story of the discovery of a stage floor that dated from before the Elizabethan period at St George's Guildhall in Kings Lynn hit the news. The attraction to the headline writers was the fact that this very stage had probably supported Shakespeare as he acted as part of the playing troupe on stage. Of course, that is a great hook for a story, as interest in Shakespeare goes well beyond those of us immersed in the history of theatre, and the idea that we can still share a space like this across 400 years is a beguiling one. I remember standing on the original floor of Anne Hathaway's cottage in Stratford Upon Avon and feeling a very similar thrill. But there is much more to the story of St George's Guildhall, a venue for theatre not just for 400 years, but for at least 600, making it the UK's oldest working theatre. So I was very pleased when Tim Fitzhigham, creative director of the Guildhall Theatre, agreed to come on the podcast and talk about St George's Guildhall and that stage. Tim Fitzhigham is the Borough Council of Kings Lynn and West Norfolk's creative director, appointed to oversee the revival of St George's Guildhall. As well as leading this extensive project, he is currently completing his PhD on Robert Armin, an actor in The King's Men who originated many of the clown and fool's roles in all but the earliest Shakespeare plays, and was a well-known playwright and author in his own right. I asked him about the origins of the Guildhall and why Kings Lynn, which is situated towards the east coast of England and during earlier times was certainly somewhat removed from the influence of London, had such a grand building.
Kings Lynn is quite a fascinating place. It's not often realised that Kings Lynn was a very, very important place in the medieval period. It was a really important port. It was the only port in the country at one point to be part of what we call the Hanseatic League. And the Hanseatic League, of course, was this early European Union. It's a lot of city-states in Europe that got together and had a preferential trading bloc. And Kings Lynn was their English port. And so Kings Lynn became phenomenally wealthy. It's also at the very mouth of the Great Ouse, the River Great Ouse, which is the most important river in many ways for inland navigation in the country. So goods were coming into Kings Lynn and being transferred at that point onto barges that were then going into inland England on the Great River Ouse. So it was a very important medieval port. And I mean, the famous statistic is that there were more goldsmiths in Lynn than there were in London during the medieval period, which just shows you the sheer amount of portable wealth that was going on in Kings Lynn. Yeah. So we've got a very important place in the medieval period with an awful lot of guilds. Kings Lynn in 1379 is recorded as having 78 guilds, which is an awful lot of guilds, second only to London at the time. And the guilds in Kings Lynn were not organised along trade lines, as were the ones in London, you know, the Fletcher's Guild or the Goldsmiths Guild or whatever it is. The ones in Kings Lynn were organised on religious grounds. Yeah. So you picked your favourite saint, a bit like you pick a football team, and you joined the guild, and that was your guild. And there were some very powerful ones. And two of the most powerful ones were the Holy Trinity Guild and the Guildhall of St George. And these two very powerful ones built two very big guild halls. Now, the Holy Trinity Guild was the kind of traditional one that the traditional Lynn hierarchy belonged to. And the Guild of St George was a kind of upstart one that the slightly more piratey, I suppose, mercantile element of Kings Lynn belonged to. And they got a royal warrant in 1406 from Henry IV, which confirmed ownership of the Guildhall that is now the Guildhall of St George, which is the theatre. And they got a second royal charter in 1461 from Edward IV. So the Guild of St George had not one but two royal charters on the theatre that we now still have standing. So it's always been a very important building historically because of that link with the guild. But then, of course, you've got these wonderful links with theatre. And that really is where the Guildhall of St George is completely unparalleled and unique, because it's the only place in the world that has recorded dramatic performance in each of the last 6 centuries. So the first recorded performance we have at the Guildhall of St George, and there were probably performances before that, but we just don't have the documents, but is in 1445. and it's a community play. We've got 4 sets of performances actually in the Guildhall of St George in 1445. We've got 3 professional companies that turn up, the Earl of Warwick's men being one of those. And then we've got this really exciting community performance. And that's what really suddenly ignites, I think, anyone who's got a passion for theatre, because the borough of Kings Lynn and West Norfolk doesn't throw anything away. And so we still have the account books for that performance in 1445. So that means we can tell you who was paid to do the costumes, who was paid to buy the candles, who was paid to serve the beer, who was paid to teach them the songs. We've got all that information in the record books, and that gives us a little window onto that rarest of things, early guild drama, which is a really rare part of English theatre. And of course, it's something Shakespeare parodied in Midsummer Night's Dream, where he was writing about Bottom the Weaver and Flute the Bellows Maker, or whatever it was, when they were doing their play. That's the sort of play that we've got actually happening in the Guildhall of St George in 1445. Then, of course, when the guilds get dissolved in the mid-1500s by Edward VI, the Guildhall hasn't really got a primary use. They all get given to the local corporation, the local government. Most of the guild halls in England get turned into the town hall, and that happens up and down the country. Find me a town that doesn't have a guild hall, and I'll show you one that's renamed it. Essentially, Kings Lynn, on the other hand, has a staggering amount of guild halls that get handed over to the borough, and they don't know what to do with them. They turn the main one, the posh one, into the town hall, which it still is. And then they've got this other one, which is even bigger, the Guildhall of St George, that they don't know what to do with. And so they continue the pattern of entertainment in the Guildhall. And the Elizabethan touring companies turn up. And you get the likes of Queen Elizabeth I's touring company turning up to Kings Lynn consistently, year on year, over a decade. Such was the kind of pull of this theatre. And so then, of course, it moves forward into James I, Charles I, Charles II. We then have a Georgian phase in the theatre, and so on, until, of course, we get to the present day, where we still have stuff going on there. Right now, we've got stuff happening this week. So it's a unique space that is very magical, and especially given the theatrical pedigree of it, is really important. And I'd always wondered if the original floor of the venue was still there underneath the other floors. So I got very excited about that and took up the 1963 floor, then the 1951 floor, then the 18th century floor, then the 1766 floor. And I went through all the different levels of floor. And finally, underneath it all was this socking great oak timber floor from a very early phase. And I managed to get the archaeologists to start doing tests on that floor to tell me exactly how old it was. And of course, we dated it using tree ring dating technology. So what you do with that is you sort of take a core of like about the size of a cork, but much longer. And that gives you all the little rings of the tree that as it grows. And there's a sequence somewhere of these tree rings, because they all grow slightly differently. The tree rings are slightly different distance apart.
Yes.
And that will tell you exactly what year that tree was felled, and therefore what year it was put into the Guildhall, because you have to work oak very quickly or it becomes unworkable. And so the date of 1417 became a very good date for us in terms of the dendro dating. And so we had a floor that was there from 1417, which means, of course, it was there when all the Elizabethan companies were coming. So suddenly you've got the stage, the area, the floor area on which the very boards on which the Elizabethan touring companies come to. And of course, for us at the Guildhall of St George, the most famous company, of course, probably that's ever come, is Shakespeare's company in 1592-93. And so we've got the very boards on which Shakespeare's company performed. So the boards that potentially the bard trod, I would say. I've been calling them the Norfolk boards, which is nice.
Very good. That's certainly a weight of history that you've got there sitting there. Must feel very special to be in that space.
Well, it's not just the floor. We've got the windows, we've got the walls, we've got the ceiling that Shakespeare performed under. It really is incredible to have a space that fundamentally hasn't changed that much, in 600 years. Yes, it's been reused, it's been recycled, and there's a lot there. But the bones of the building, the ceiling, the floor, the walls, the windows, they're all still there and they haven't moved. And that's really, really unique and really exciting.
And so what are the records that tell you that Shakespeare's company came to Kings Lynn?
Sure. So again, Borough of Kings Lynn doesn't throw stuff away. So we've got the account books from the relevant years. And what used to happen, and the way we've been able to piece together, there's a wonderful man, Andrew Gurr, who has pieced together from multiple borough account books the touring circuits that the Elizabethan touring companies took. And it's a relatively new discipline, this, because for many, many years, everybody just thought that the Elizabethan drama happened in London. And it just happened in London and it didn't go outside London. And then suddenly it started becoming apparent in borough account books that payments were being made to touring companies in the Elizabethan period. And at that point, you have to say, well, they can't just have been in London because they were being paid to play in Kings Lynn, Norwich, Dunwich, Ipswich, Coventry, all sorts of places. And what Andrew Gurr's done, which I think is really brilliant, is to try and link together the years that these companies are paid by different places to play in their towns. And he's managed to do that, to create these sort of touring circuits. So there's an East Anglian touring circuit that he's created, which appears to go sort of London, Bury, St Edmunds, Norwich, and then down the coast to sort of Southwold, Aldborough, Dunwich, Ipswich, then back into Essex, and then back into London. So that's a nice loop. What's interesting about the Kings Lynn touring circuit is that it's a straight line. They go straight up to Kings Lynn and then straight back down again. They go London, Cambridge, Kings Lynn, Cambridge, London. And that just proves in many ways how valuable Kings Lynn was as a touring location, because they wanted to get to it. They weren't going on the way to anything else. They wanted to get to Lynn, make the money and go back. And we believe that ties in with the Kings Lynn Mart. So there's a touring festival of the sort of Nottingham Goose Fair type festival that has a royal charter from King John. And that happens in Kings Lynn every year, and it happens around Valentine's Day. So there's a kind of pattern that we see emerging where touring companies come to Kings Lynn at the time of the Mart and sort of get trickle down from the money that's going into the Mart. So this travelling fair, everyone turns up to buy, sell, make money, take money, and the players seem to turn up and are part of that. They're taking the money out of the Mart. And the Guildhall of St George is, I would say, 15 metres away from the Tuesday Marketplace, which is the location of the Mart. So it's the closest venue to that big touring festival that they could possibly find as an indoor space, which you would need in February, March, and April, to get this money out of the people that were going to the Mart. And so I think it's really interesting to see those payments, but also to link it to a big economic event that happened in Kings Lynn every single year. Yeah, and later we can see actually that the acting season is either longer or shorter depending on how much money the Mart is making that year. So we can link the two together. If the Mart's really rich that year, then the acting company will stay for longer. And if the Mart doesn't seem to be making loads of money, then the acting company will pull stumps relatively quickly and get on to somewhere else.
Yeah, it makes absolute commercial sense when you put it like that they knew when the markets were happening and where it was likely to be the best place to perform at any given time. And then if it's going well, you just extend your time there and postpone going on somewhere else.
Exactly right. And so in terms of the Kings Lynn and Shakespeare link, there are several links between the venue and Shakespeare. Not least, we've got payments to lots of the companies that are associated with Shakespeare. So if you don't believe that Shakespeare was in the Earl of Pembroke's Men, then you will probably come and say, oh, he was in the Admiral's Men. Or if you don't believe he was in the Admiral's Men, you might go, he was in Sussex Men. Yeah. And if you don't think he was in Sussex Men, you might think he was in... But the point about this is that all of those companies played the Guildhall in Kings Lynn. So, pick your company. I prefer the Earl of Pembroke's Men, I have to say. I think that's the most likely of the companies that Shakespeare was in. But pick your company, because they all played the theatre in Kings Lynn. That's how important that theatre was. And we see, of course, many companies coming through that have been associated with Shakespeare. So it's a really kind of conclusive, in some ways, argument to make. But there's more than that. That payment record is simply one of the links that we have. Another one is 2 documents produced in Shakespeare's lifetime, one a pamphlet, one a play, which detail an event that happened, they say, in the theatre in Lynn, Norfolk. So that it's really clear that it's not another Lynn, it's Lynn, or it's us, it's Kings Lynn.
Right.
And what happened was that a lady was sitting, it tells us, with her new young second husband, watching a play called The Murder of Friar Francis. And at the point that Friar Francis gets murdered, the lady, we're told, screams out, "I did it, I killed my husband." And it turns out she had killed her wealthy first husband to marry her new young second husband. And seeing the murder of Friar Francis on stage made her scream, "I did it," and confess her guilt. And of course, we're told she was arrested, she was taken into custody, and we're told she was tried for murder. And Shakespeare, of course, was in Kings Lynn that year when the murder of Friar Francis was on, 1592-93. Shakespeare, of course, hears this story because he's in Kings Lynn and stores it away. And then 4 years later, when he comes to write Hamlet, he thinks, hang on a minute. And in that wonderful soliloquy, "Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I," Shakespeare, through Hamlet, recounts the story that happened in Kings Lynn. "I have heard that guilty creatures, while sitting at play, if they, paraphrasing now, but if they see something that reminds them of their guilt, are like to scream out and confess it." And then, of course, it finishes with the plot twist: "The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king." And of course, this is based on an actual event that happened in the very theatre that I'm the creative director of now. So it's a huge honour to have a theatre space that is linked to Shakespeare and inspired him to alter the plot of one of his most, well, if not his most famous play. So it's a staggering link between the theatre in Kings Lynn and Shakespeare. And of course, Robert Armin, Shakespeare's comedian, was also born one street away from that theatre and would have known that theatre very, very well in his youth. And it may well be that Armin saw theatre there and perhaps even became inspired to undertake theatre by some of the things that he might have seen in that space. And it's also, I would say, highly probable from the payments that we have in the payments book that Armin returned with Shakespeare to Lynn in 1603, 1604 to play there. But more research is needed on that, I would say.
Yeah, do those records go down to telling us what individual plays were performed?
No, they don't.
Right.
But the reason that we're confident on the murder of Friar Francis is because we know the company in whose repertoire it was. So theatre companies at the time used to have lists of plays that they were permitted to play, that they owned. They owned the text. So it would be like it is a bit like now, the only people that can do, I don't know, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child are the company in London that have the rights to do Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Yeah. It's the same sort of thing. So Elizabethan companies owned plays. And we know that the company that owned The Murder of Friar Francis only played Kings Lynn once. So we can be relatively sure on the year that play was performed in Kings Lynn because we know the year that the company that owned it played in Kings Lynn. So that's the logic there, if that makes sense.
Right. Yes, it does. So it's that kind of calculation that we have to make. But then you can be fairly certain that that's correct.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other problem. You may have missed a payment in the book. You know, it may have been that somebody else paid for them to come in a year, a local aristocrat, that we don't have that access to those records. Right. There are definitely other possibilities. We know that Kings Lynn was awash with playing companies because we know that in I think it was 1613-14. The mayor and corporation of Kings Lynn wrote to the Lord Chancellor, Lord Chamberlain at the time, and said, please will you regulate the amount of London companies that are coming to Kings Lynn, because there's too many of them. We just can't take it. And we don't have that level of payment in the book. for that date.
Right.
So we know that they're coming without being paid. So we know that there are companies that we don't know that are playing in Kings Lynn or can't prove that are playing in Kings Lynn. But the sheer weight of them, the sheer amount of companies that come and play the Guildhall in Kings Lynn is quite staggering during that period.
I think it's one thing I've really become aware of lately is the potential for the amount of time that actors and players and the companies worked outside of the strict rule of the law. And that's the grey area that maybe we know even less about than the little we think we do know. You know, did they perform sometimes on Sundays when they weren't meant to? Did they go places where they weren't strictly allowed to? How far could the rules be bent? Seems to be quite a difficult question to answer.
Well, it's very difficult. And also, even on the evidence we have, we know they were doing it. So you've got a great example in Norwich where one of the touring companies turns up. I can't remember which one. Let's call it the Earl of Sussex men turn up with all their letters from the Earl of Sussex saying, we can play in Norwich. Here we go. Here's our letter from the Earl of Sussex. And the mayor and city of Norwich let them in. Earl of Sussex men, I don't think it was, but let's say it was, did a great season in Norwich. They then leave. Then another company turns up and says, we're the Earl of Sussex men. Here's our letter from the Earl of Sussex saying we can play here. And of course, the mayor and townsfolk of Norwich didn't know what to do because they'd just paid the Earl of Sussex men. So they had to pay the second set of Earl of Sussex men because they didn't know which one was which. And they didn't want to offend the Earl of Sussex. So essentially, from what we know acting companies were doing, they were definitely breaking the law. And as you say, therefore, what we don't know they were doing, I mean, is absolutely anyone's guess.
Yeah. No wonder they got to have a bad reputation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, it is justified. Again, we know there's a famous case in Norwich where an acting company turn up, there's a bit of a kerfuffle, and an actor draws his sword and kills a butler. And the employer of the butler goes to court and says, you know, these 3 actors have killed my butler. And the judge is then faced with a very difficult decision because, of course, it's the Queen's men. So it's Queen Elizabeth I's acting company who are acting under a royal warrant. So the judge has a very tricky job at that moment because, of course, it's quite obvious they shouldn't have killed a butler. But it's also quite obvious to the judge that he doesn't want to get on the wrong side of Elizabeth I.
Right.
So the judge does what I suspect judges up and down the land have done for many, many years, which is to come up with a solution which doesn't really answer the question, but gets him off the hook. And he says, yes, this is a very serious case, far, 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 far more serious than anyone could imagine. It's so serious that I'm going to have to give over a lot of time to this case. And I don't currently have a lot of time. So the next time these 3 actors are in Norwich, they'll have to stand trial for this. So we'll defer it till they come back, and of course they never went back. So they essentially got away with it, but didn't go back to Norwich. So they skipped town. Really, would be the sort of way of doing it. But yeah, I mean, again, it's so again, as you say, one of those, and of course we know there was one actor killed another actor in Stratford Upon Avon in the 1580s, famously. So I think there's loads of evidence that actors were up to no good, even on the stuff we know. And I think it's the stuff we don't know that is probably even worse, I suspect.
Probably is, yeah. Plenty to keep digging into there as far as we can. So to come right forward to today, you're in the place at the minute, aren't you? What's happening to that floor now? You must have lots and lots of people wanting to come and stand on it and have that frisson.
We do. I mean, it's a very old floor and it's a very secure floor. It holds the building up, but it's also something that we've got to keep safe for people going forward. We want to share it with people, but we also have a duty of care to that wonderful floor. It's survived 600 years. It needs to survive another 600 years. And our plan is to renovate this theatre. That's what we're engaged in. We just got planning permission to do that. It came through on Monday. And it's really exciting. We've got a huge vision. We've got a huge plan. We've got this incredible idea that we're going to not only renovate the theatre space itself, we're going to do up the backstage area. The galleries that we've got on site will be done up. We'll be creating studio spaces for artists and businesses. And of course, we'll do up the cafe and the restaurant as well. So, and the 3 public courtyards. So it will be a real centre of culture and of artistic endeavour, right in the middle of the east of England, which is really exciting to be part of. So going back to your initial question about what about the floor, our plan is to make that floor available to people, to make people be able to see it and to share it and to enjoy it in a way that they can't now. At the moment, we've got a hatch that we've put in to share it with people, and our volunteer guides open that hatch every day and they shut it every day, so that anyone that comes to the Guildhall can go upstairs with the guides and they can see the lovely floor for themselves, and they can see the area of floor where we think Shakespeare's company would have performed. But in terms of making it so that people can walk all over it all the time, I think we've been advised that might be a bridge too far for the fabric of the floor. So we just need to be a little bit careful. But we've got more archaeology to do on that floor. We're going to start that in March 2025. And we've got more archaeologists coming on site, and they're going to be taking up the previously mentioned 1963 floor, 51 floor, 18th century floor, 1766 floor, going through all the floors, cataloguing the lot, and then looking at the original 1417 floor to see exactly what information we can get out of that. And of course, interestingly, it's not just the floor. I know everybody is excited by the floor, and rightly so, but we also have found in the walls evidence of the very earliest touring theatres that were in that building. So again, we found evidence of early theatrical adaptation of the space to allow performance to go on. So in a way, we're sort of writing the textbooks here, because nobody really knows what these early touring venues were like.
Right.
Nobody really knows if they were adapted at all. And so the evidence that we're finding in the venue, pulling out of the walls, is actually, as I say, writing the textbooks on what was happening in these really early touring theatres. You've got to think the Globe Theatre and the theatre before it were some of the earliest purpose-built theatres in the country and in the world, of course. And the touring theatres that come from that same period are therefore some of the very earliest theatrically adapted buildings in the world. And we are dealing with one of those in Kings Lynn. And the work that we're doing, painstaking archaeology that we're doing, is because it's a real chance here for people like me and you who love theatre to get information on something that currently we really don't have enough or any real information about at all. And so it's terribly exciting to be part of that part of the research, I have to say, because for me, that's the thing that actually suddenly this venue might illuminate, is not just this massive history of performance on paper, but if we can find the nuts and bolts of how they adapted the space to let theatre happen and thrive from the very earliest days, I think that's really exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, completely fascinating to get back into that earliest period where we know so little. Amazing. Yeah. And clearly quite a long-term project. So if anyone wants to have a look and keep up to date with what you're doing, what's the best place for them to look for that?
Yes, well, we've got a website, stgeorgesguildhall.com. Please do come and join in the fun, join the mailing list, get involved. We're really excited about the project and we'd love to share it with as many people as possible. We've got St George's Guildhall on Facebook, and we also have st.g Guildhall on Instagram, where we're putting pictures of all the stuff that we're doing. And also come and see us. We're in King Street and Kings Lynn. We've always got something going on, and it'd be lovely to see you and show you around and say hi.
My thanks to Tim for taking the time to talk to me today. I've put links to the St George's Guildhall in the show notes so that you can easily look up further details there, where there is a very good description of the history and the ongoing project of restoration there, and of course some pictures of the uncovered medieval stage. As Tim mentioned, it is possible to visit and tour the Guildhall, details of which are also on the website. You can also find all of this by searching on Google for St George's Guildhall, Kings Lynn. You heard Tim mention there Robert Armin, who was a lead comic actor in The King's Men after the departure of Will Kemp, and also a son of Kings Lynn. Tim is in the process of finalising a PhD on Robert Armin, and the good news is that he has agreed to a return visit on the podcast to talk about this truly fascinating character. Definitely something to look forward to for when we are nearer Robert's time with Shakespeare in the timeline. Next time, as promised, we will be temporarily turning our attention away from Shakespeare and onto the life and times of Ben Jonson. In the meantime, please join the Facebook page or group, or find the podcast on Instagram or X just to keep up to date with new episodes and other theatre-related things. If you do feel able to help with the costs of running the podcast, then please head on over to Patreon, where you will find additional content for a small monthly fee or a one-off donation. You can also make a one-off show of support through Ko-fi.com. You can find details or ways to support the podcast and the website, which is www.thehistoryofeuropeantheatre.com. That's also a great place to get in touch with me if you wish, by using the contact form, or you could even leave me a voice message by clicking on the microphone icon. I look forward to your company next time, but if you have any comments or concerns in the meantime, you can always contact me by email at thoetp@gmail.com or via X at thoetp.